All right, welcome back to the NFL Draft Preview Show. Larry Krueger with you on this Saturday as we get you ready for the 2025 NFL Draft. And man, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome Matt Maiocco to the KNBR airwaves. Of course, does a bang-up job covering the Niners, NBC Sports Bay Area. Matty, good to see you. Good to talk to you. And wow, I mean, is it safe to say, I mean, we've seen a wave of offseason departures in free agency that has made this roster somewhat depleted. And to me, it also kind of makes this draft hypercritical, and maybe the most critical draft in the Shanahan-Lynch era. But I don't know about that. That might be debatable. What do you think?
No, I don't think it is just, I don't think that's hyperbole because I think a lot of times when we talk about the draft, I think we always say, oh, this is a really important draft for the 49ers. It's always an important draft. But this is the first time where the 49ers are drafting for now as much as they're going to be drafting for now. They've done a really good job in the past of looking ahead a year and seeing, oh, we're not going to have Aaron Banks next year, so they draft Dominic Pooney. Charvarius Ward probably isn't coming back, so there's Renardo Green. Either Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk might not be around next year. Oh, there's Ricky Pearsall and Noah Hufanga. Well, here's Malik Mustafa, and they've done that through the years. I mean, even going back to when they got Banks. They didn't need him year one. They needed him year two after Laken Tomlinson left. So they've always been able to kind of map out their strategy of which free agents a year from now that they probably won't re-sign. But this year, with such attrition on this roster and trying to get their salary cap in order for the future and also trying to get younger, they have very obvious needs for now. And they need a starter or two or three from this draft, but they need guys who can, for instance, on the defensive line, if they got 3 defensive linemen in this draft, they would expect and probably need all 3 of those defensive linemen to play big time rotational snaps. So from that standpoint, I think that this is an important draft for the 49ers at so many different positions.
It's interesting too. I kind of feel like John Lynch brings some momentum into this draft because I was looking at the redraft in the Athletic of last year's NFL draft, and they moved Dom Pooney from where the Niners took him at 86. If they did the redraft, they're saying Pooney would have gone 16th overall. So you got to think John Lynch is feeling really great about 2024 and really eager to get going here in 2025 and with this what we're both describing as a critical draft. The Niners are trying to bounce back from a very disappointing 6-11 season. Lynch and Shanahan hold 11 selections beginning with the 11th pick overall. Let's start there. Tony Pauline stopped on a podcast. He's an NFL scout who's somewhat sourced and seemingly tied into the Niners. He stopped by on a podcast this week and basically said, hey, the Niners, from the people that he's talking to, are going to be deciding between Walter Nolan, the defensive tackle from Ole Miss, and Shamar Stewart, the defensive end from Texas A&M, when they pick at 11. Both very intriguing names. Shamar Stewart's got a ton of upside, but some questionable production. But he may be Myles Garrett, 2.0, same school, same height, weight, speed. And then you've got, Walter Nolan, who I kind of think is the perfect fit for the Niners. Ole Miss defensive tackle, started at A&M, 5-star high school recruit. What do you think, Matt, of those two guys? Or that report that those could be the two guys that they're kind of honing in on?
Yeah, I mean, that makes tons of sense. And both of those guys make a lot of sense. And, Shamar Stewart, everybody looks at the 1.5 sacks, every season that he played. But, I mean, he's a freak, right? I mean, you look at him and he looks the part. And, he's got everything that a defensive line coach would want, a defensive coordinator would want, some position flexibility. But, there's probably not a defensive line coach on the planet who wouldn't say, let me have him, let me have him. And then, Nolan is, a penetrating 3 technique, both positions. They need guys like that. So, when I hear you say that, to me, it makes tons of sense that I would not be shocked if either one of those guys ends up with the 49ers. So yeah, I, I mean that sounds like it's spot on to me.
Who do you think has the call here? We know Shanahan has the money, makes the most money. We know Lynch has got the title, but they did bring Robert Saleh back, and they do have Gus Bradley, who's a very accomplished coach in his own right. They also have some really good personnel guys and Tariq Ahmad and R.J. Gillen. Um, is this a Robert Saleh call, or do you think this is or maybe even beyond that? Is this a Chris Kacerek call where we get to 11 and we say, Chris, you got Nolan, you got Stewart. Who do you want? And then they just defer to Chris.
No, I don't think it. I
Okay.
don't think they would do that. I think it is. It's a John Lynch call, but he's a consensus builder. So he might have it his way, or he might see it one way, and he would certainly want everybody to be on board with that pick before they turn that card in. But it's the scouts. It's the regional scouts. It's the national scouts. It's Josh Williams. It's all the above. All those I was going to say players, but yeah, they're the players in that draft room. It's all of those guys combined. And if there is a split, then it's up to John Lynch to figure it out. And, he'll talk to Kyle Shanahan, but Kyle probably wouldn't have as much sway when it comes to a defensive player. But, certainly Robert Saleh, Robert, how do you envision this guy fitting into the system? And what can we do with him on first down, on second down, on these pressure packages? What's your vision for this guy if we take him at 11? And, I think that would be the way to go. So, they brought back Robert Saleh for a reason. They're paying him a heck of a lot of money. And when they did that, they knew that they were going to be losing a lot of guys on that defensive front and on the defense in general. Obviously they were hoping to bring back Dre Greenlaw, but a lot more losses than gains. But now, it's a John Lynch draft. I mean, his name is on that, that leaderboard, that scoreboard when it comes to who you draft, what the roster composition is, but he doesn't do it alone. And I would say that Robert Saleh would have, of the non-decision makers, Robert Saleh would probably have the biggest voice in that decision.
Is Lynch feeling the pressure? He was asked about, hey, what's the plan? And he's like, there's this thing called the draft. And it was like unusually snarky for him. He's not usually doesn't really strike that tone. It kind of made me think maybe there's a little bit more pressure on John's head than maybe we see from afar. What's your sense of that his reaction? Yeah, we have a plan and it's called the draft. It's like, okay, but I mean, the greatest draft in Niner history was the 86 draft, and they got like 8 starters out of it. They probably would have to replicate the greatest draft in the history of the franchise to fill all their needs this year.
Yeah, I mean, they do have a lot of needs. In fact, I mean, it's much an easier exercise to list what they wouldn't draft in
Right.
this, and there's probably not an answer. Like they could even you wouldn't think that they would need a quarterback because they have Brock Purdy, they have Mac Jones, and Tanner Mordecai is the 3, but they could still take a quarterback in this draft. And so it is important, and there is pressure, but I don't think it's outside pressure. I don't think that pressure is coming from Jed York. Hey, get back to the playoffs or else. I think it's self-imposed pressure because if you're John Lynch, if you're Kyle Shanahan, and you've been so close, for the last 6 years. Last year they weren't close, and in 2020 they weren't close. But other than that, I mean, they're making it to the Final Four every year, and how is success measured with the 49ers? It's been a long time, but it's by adding some hardware to the trophy case. And that's something that they haven't been able to do. And who knows, maybe their best shots have come and gone and they'll never get back to that spot. But there are still building blocks. There are still high priced, Hall of Fame caliber players that are on this roster and guys who aren't on their last legs. Fred Warner still has good football ahead of him. George Kittle, the same. Brock Purdy, we'll see what Christian McCaffrey does. When Brandon Ayuk comes back, healthy? What's his production going to be like? Nick Bosa. So they still have a lot of really good players, and a lot of good players that, teams around the league would love to have the 49ers problem of trying to stack a draft on top of an already experienced and talented nucleus. But yeah, I mean, I think there is pressure when you've gotten that far and you haven't been able to kick the door down. So they're going to need huge contributions from this rookie class if they're going to get back there and be a challenger in the NFC.
There was a report earlier this week that the Niners have reached out to teams picking in the top 6 of the draft to potentially gauge a trade up and obviously to select a player. I'm trying to speculate as to who that trade up would be for. I'm thinking maybe Membu, maybe Mason Graham. Do you think that the Niners may have internally such a high grade comparatively to the other players at those 2 spots in Graham and Membu that maybe we know that trading back is probably the volume play, and that's probably in their best interest. But they also don't want to screw up this first round. And if they feel like that the second tackle or the third player on their list is worlds worse than Mason Graham, maybe they would move up for Mason Graham. Or if they move up, who are they moving up for in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I was just talking to someone in New England who thought the 49ers could be in play to move up to number 4. And the thought was for Abdul Carter. So I think most people, who grade this draft would have Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter as 1 and 2 in whichever order. And that's over just best player. Cam Ward will certainly go number 1 just because he plays that position. But to me, and I'm not discounting that they've had those conversations. I think they talk about everything. But when you look at the 49ers and again, the number of needs they have, and when you think about if you move up from 11 to 6 or to 5 or to 4 or wherever they move up to, I mean, you're giving away or you're having to part ways with a lot of really valuable draft capital. And for this draft, yeah, the 11th overall pick is huge. Of course it is. But what might even be more huge would be the picks at 43 and 75 and 100 and 113 and 138 and 147. I mean, you can still get really good players where the 49ers have needs at those spots, whether that's, an offensive lineman who can develop into a starter, whether that's, a day 1 rotational defensive lineman, whether that's a starting linebacker, whether that's another tight end or a wide receiver who might be able to step in and make some plays, whether that's a safety, whether that's a nickel back. I mean, I just listed a bunch of positions there that if the 49ers were to move up to get one guy, that they'd be missing out on an opportunity to fill other spots down the road.
Where's corner in this mix? Trey Brown is listed as their 3rd starting corner, and he's not a starting corner, at least according to his football card. So I got to think corner is an outside corner, since you got Demo in the slot, opposite Renardo, is probably high up on the list. Tony Pauline says they may have interest in Dorian Strong from Virginia Tech, who's a good-sized corner, who's projected to go in the 3rd round. Where is corner on the needs, list of needs?
Yeah, I mean, it's up there. The question, and you mentioned about Deommodore Lenoir, being able to slide in and play nickelback, and he's very good at that. He's very good on the outside as well. Is it easier to find your 3rd corner as somebody who plays on the outside, or is it easier to find your 3rd corner somebody who comes in and plays the slot receiver, plays nickelback? So, they did have a top 30 visit with Quincy Riley from Louisville, who would be,
right,
in that 3rd or 4th round mix, and that he's considered, probably, quite possibly, a day 1 starter at nickelback. But there's been plenty of mock drafts from people I respect saying 49ers could get, Will Johnson at number 11. And to me, I don't know. I mean, would I be shocked if they take him? I guess I wouldn't, but I think to me, it's easier to make a case why not to take him. The injuries, maybe he doesn't play run support as well as, the 49ers would like. And also you have your starting corners. I think Renardo Green is, we'll see how he develops from year 1 to year 2, but he looks like a long-term starter who they took in the second round last year. We know Diamador Lenore is darn good, that they signed him to an extension and for once kind of got ahead of the whole contract situation. So they got him before he hit the market and was able to cash in on a big deal. So I would think the cornerback would be third, fourth round. And it's kind of take your pick. Do you take an outside corner that maybe might have a difficult time getting on the field? If he's competing against Trey Brown, who, as you said, may not be a starter, but is he a third guy? And could a rookie as a third or fourth round pick slide into that role? Or do you take a nickelback? And it just seems to me like nickelbacks have always been undervalued, and now we're starting to see a shift because now nickelbacks are starting to get paid. Well, it seems to me that where the 49ers have a kind of an area where they haven't addressed is that nickelback role. And I think that it would behoove them to get a safety type player who's more of a free safety and also a guy who has nickelback flexibility. So to me, that's, I don't know where I would list cornerback or nickelback on my list of needs for the 49ers, but it's certainly up there.
Matt Maiocco with us on the UMA guest line as we chop it up, looking ahead to the draft Thursday night, a crucial draft for the 49ers. There's a belief in some corners that you should try to get a quarterback in every draft. And I've heard the Niners say that at times, that would be a goal. And I look at the depth chart and I'm like, Mac Jones is the clear 2. I really like Tanner Mordecai, and I'm a big Brock Purdy fan, so I'm okay if the 49ers didn't draft a quarterback. But then, I've been watching the Gruden QB camp on Barstool, and I love Riley Leonard. And Matt, I don't know if you knew this, and you hosted an event that was awesome. And it was Alex Smith, Jeff Garcia, Brock Purdy, Steve Young, and yourself. And I thought it was one of the best things I've seen. I was told by, I think Jordan Elliott told me a few weeks ago that Riley Leonard was there for that. Did you know that?
I met him, before the show, and it was a kind of.
What was he doing there? Because he's not from here, right?
He's not from here, and so that was, I was introduced to him, and that was my first thought. Was like, oh, he must be like a kid from the peninsula or South Bay or something. No, he found out about this, and he had somebody like a family friend or somebody who told him about it, and so he wanted to just soak it in. And so it was very impressive. And I met him in the green room beforehand, and he had
What'd you think of him?
Oh, I thought he was a great kid.
Yeah.
And what was, to me, the most impressive part was that he took the initiative to be there and try to learn something from these guys. And kind of behind the scenes, he went up to Brock Purdy and he introduced himself. And I think he said, I'm a Notre Dame, quarterback at Notre Dame, Riley Leonard. And Brock Purdy shook his hand and he goes, oh, you transferred from Duke, right? So Brock Purdy knew all about Riley Leonard. And then he asked a question at that the Q&A or, part of the panel. So, he's an athletic guy,
He is very special. I saw him with Gruden and Matt. I mean, I know they don't need a quarterback, but I've had such special vibes on this kid. And Gruden's like, man, he's got a hell of an arm, even though he didn't show it at Notre Dame. He's a hell of an athlete, but it was how smart he was. Gruden was giving him all these different variables and telling him to call the plays. And this means right. This means left. This means this means that. And he was like hitting every note. He did not, his mental ability to crunch is amazing. His athleticism is off the charts. The Notre Dame thing, gives you a little.
That's the thing that stood out to me, Larry. Is he's big.
Big. He's 6'3", 6'4", 215.
He's not a small guy.
No, so I
don't
what do you think?
I don't know where he would go in the draft.
Mid rounds, round 4 or 5.
Round 4 or 5. Boy,
early.
I don't know. I don't know.
He's
would
special. He is special, though. There's
would
no
it
question.
shock me? No, but when you're looking at going back to just how much they need immediately, I mean, they'd have to look at it this way. They'd have to say, who's the defensive tackle or who's the offensive lineman that the 49ers could get there? What's his role going to be? Oh, he's going to be, maybe a special teamer, a backup, maybe if he makes a team practice squad. If you're starting to look like that at where the 49ers draft board is, then yeah, why not go get the quarterback? But if there's somebody on their board where a position coach or scout or whatever the case may be, Tarek Ahmad or RJ Gillen look at that and go, oh no, this guy has an opportunity to plug in right now, then you're going to take that guy. But if it's more of a projection of, oh, we can develop this guy and maybe he could become a starter year 2 or 3, then maybe that is worth the gamble to take Riley Leonard there.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really intriguing. I did a YouTube video on it, and I entitled it Riley Leonard, No Matter What, as my takeoff on draft day with my Vontae Mack, no matter what. Two last ones. Alec Ayamanor was a very talked to player on the sidelines of the Niners local pro day.
Yeah.
John Lynch talked to him for 20 minutes, and then here comes Leonard Hankerson for another 20 minutes. It's really, I mean, if you said to me, if you had to put all the money you had on one prospect in any round or after the draft becoming a 49er, I don't know, man. I'd have a hard time. I'm not wagering on this kid, Alec Ayamanor. It just seems like they really badly want him. I think he's probably going to have to be a day 2 guy. That scares the heck out of me. He's blown out his knee in every phase, the meniscus, the ACL, the PCL, the MCL. I know that was a while ago, but I watched this film. I didn't see any real separation. I'm concerned about the Niners taking overdrafting another Stanford prospect. If you were wagering, how would he be the guy that you would say is most likely to be a Niner? And what do you think of him? What have you heard about him?
Well, where would you look at him? Probably 75, right? 75 or 100 with the 49ers draft picks there in the 3rd round. I know they've had Kyle Williams in, the Washington State wide receiver who reminds a lot of people of Emmanuel Sanders. Yeah, I mean, I think they'll take a wide receiver in this draft. In fact, when I was talking to John Lynch at the combine, I was talking to him about this was after the Deebo Samuel trade had already gone down. It hadn't yet become official. This is when, they don't know what they're going to be getting with Brandon Ayuk, and really still don't, whether he's going to be available. Would he be available week 1? Kind of questionable. Would he be on the PUP list, missing the first 4 games? That's maybe more likely. So, I mean, I do expect them to take a wide receiver, but it's just, it's what wide receiver? And yeah, they have shown interest in Alec Ayamanor. Ayamanor and Kyle Williams. I'm sure there's others that kind of fit what they want. So, I don't know. I mean, I think based on the problems they had with injuries last year, they would really have to have the medical staff involved with this because, I think a guy like him, a guy like, Josh Simmons with the patellar injury, Will Johnson, I mentioned him, the cornerback who's had some injuries, only played in 6 games last year for Michigan. I think they would really have to take a hard look. And, I think it's easier to justify a pick later. If a guy gets injured who's already had a history of injuries, I think it's very easy for everybody to go, what were they thinking? What they think was going to happen with him? So I think they just need to kind of cover their bases, and unless they really think that this is a bargain, and now maybe he falls into 113 or wherever, then maybe that justifies it. But I would think that guys with injury histories like that, it would knock them down at least half a round and maybe a full round or more.
Yeah, he might be a day 3 guy. They did bring in an interesting name, wide receiver, today for a workout that I saw, and it's Jordan Watkins from Ole Miss, who had an 8-catch, 254-yard, 5-touchdown performance against Arkansas this year. And he is a day 3 guy. I mean, he runs in the 4.3s. He's more built like a running back, 6 feet, 200 pounds. He's thick and shorter. Maybe he's 5'10", 5'11", 200 pounds. But
sounds to me like a Deebo Samuel body.
Yeah. And a guy who's also going to be probably in an area of the draft where they probably would consider a wide receiver.
Mhm.
Last one for you. One angle on this thing that I think is an interesting angle that is kind of underexplored is that lots of Niner fans, and Kawakami said it the other day, he said the Niners are not in the Super Bowl hunt. They're not in it. And I just can't say that on the 16th of April. I cannot make that kind of declaration. I know what Tim's saying, and I'm not really here to tell him he's wrong, Matt. He might be. They have a lot of needs. There's no question. But they've also had a lot of success in the draft at times. The one angle on this thing is the veteran. So what do you think of the idea of maybe trading back, getting a few more day 3 picks, and then maybe sending, I don't know, a 6th-round pick to the Eagles for Bryce Huff and trying to reunite Robert Saleh and Bryce Huff, or maybe trading a future 4th-round pick to the Raiders, and instead of taking a rookie tight end, take a Michael Mayer from Notre Dame and bring him in as a younger tight end who's available. Do you think the Niners may use a couple of their draft picks to try to find a veteran that, so they're not showing up in camp saying, let's try to contend with 15 rookies?
Yeah, I do. In fact, I think they will. I don't know when it might happen, if it's going to happen after the draft or during the draft. It could be a pick for next year. But I do think the 49ers are very interested in acquiring a veteran player or two through a trade. So yeah, no, I think everything's on the table. But from the tea leaves I was reading from the NFL annual meeting in Florida, is that is very much in play. And I don't know if that'd be a post June 1 thing where maybe they help out a team that's already kind of looking to move a guy, but they don't want to do it now because of salary cap purposes. But yeah, no, I think that's, and I don't know what position that would be. Could be at wide receiver. And speaking of wide receivers, Demarcus Robinson probably won't be available for the first 3 games of the season, although the NFL hasn't said anything yet. So yeah, no, I definitely think that's in play. And one thing about, and I just looked this up. We all know that for our schedule looking ahead isn't too daunting.
Right. It's very favorable.
It's a very favorable schedule. And a lot of people would say, well, it's the same schedule the Rams are playing. Well, it's not. Listen to this, Larry. And I'm sure you've already seen this, but the 49ers and the Rams, both the whole division plays the NFC South and the AFC South. So those are probably the 2 weakest divisions in football. But where is the Rams? Because of their first place schedule, they played Detroit, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. The 49ers, out of those same divisions, play Chicago, the New York Giants, and Cleveland. So think about that huge 3-game flip where the Rams could easily go 1-2 or 0-3 against those teams, and the 49ers could easily go 2-1 or 3-0 against those teams. So that's why it's I wouldn't say I do think it takes kind of a leap of faith to say 49ers are Super Bowl contenders, because you got to prove it, coming off a 16-11 record. But also when you look at that kind of schedule disparity, and you realize that, man, all you have to do is get into the playoffs and how a team is playing, in late December or January, that carries so much weight. If you can get into the playoffs, you have a chance. And I would say right now, even though that was a 16-11 season or team from last year, it's certainly not out of the question that the 49ers could, be contenders in the NFC West and win the NFC West and be contenders in the NFC.
I see it the same way. Get to the playoffs, and guess what? Then you've got a quarterback and a head coach, both in their prime, who have Super Bowl experience. And how many teams can say that in the playoff field in any given year? Not many. So I can't sit here on in mid-April and be like, they're cooked. They might be cooked, but
they might be.
I'd rather say that in mid-May. In mid-May, check with me. I'll have more concrete data.
And how many people were saying, "Oh yeah, Washington Commanders are going to be, NFC Championship game bound"? Nobody was saying that, and
Right.
of course, they had one of the great rookie seasons from a quarterback, but same principle applies. There's the 49ers roster is probably, not even. I don't know what it's not even 75% set, right, from what it's going to look like after the draft.
Right. Maddie, awesome stuff. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for jumping on KNBR. We love rapping Niners with you. We'll do it again. And thanks again.
All right, Larry. Always my pleasure. Thank you.
Matt Maiocco, NBC Sports Bay Area. My kid always will. Sometimes when he's trying to screw with me, he'll walk by. He'll walk by. He'll see me laying on the couch. He'll come whisper in my ear. Nobody knows the Niners like Matt Maiocco. And then I'll swat at him. Get out of here, you ungrateful. Maddie, thanks again.
All right, thanks.
We'll talk to you soon. More straight ahead. The Niners 2025 NFL Draft Preview Show continues next on the Sports Leader.